Welcome to the Sooners 360 Recruiting Podcast, a podcast for OU recruiting fans by Sooners 360. Each week we catch you up on the latest in OU recruiting news and provide opinions and evaluations on all things OU football recruiting. I'm Chris Mason, lead recruiting analyst for Sooners 360. This podcast is now sponsored by Sooners 360 on Patreon. To support this podcast, please go to patreon.com/Sooners360817 and click subscribe. It's only $2 a month, and there's also a free trial option. I'm posting all of my regular written recruiting content there. The link for this will also be in the show notes. Also, this podcast is now part of the Believe podcast family, every team, every topic, everywhere. I'm also appearing on the Horns Down podcast YouTube channel discussing OU season. Go to YouTube, search for Horns Down, and subscribe to that, please. Doing some post-game analysis and discussing OU's season after every game on that channel as well. So if you want to hear more about what's going on with the program, that's a good place to hear my opinions and my views on what's going on. This is episode 107. Littrell leaving, commits next. So we'll jump to the recruiting news first. And the first item, which I think we'll just knock out, is for 2025, there are no new offers at defensive end or defensive tackle, and this is becoming weirder and stranger as the weeks go on. I know Todd Bates does not want to sign one defensive tackle. I wouldn't imagine that he's looking to add a lot of portal talent at D-line, maybe a defensive end, maybe one big D tackle. He did that last year. I know you still signed, multiple defensive linemen. So I'm a little confused as to OU's purpose and design here. So we'll see what happens. Looks like names like Joseph Mabachu from Georgia are off the board. He's got his visit set up. Still haven't seen an offer to anybody else of note. So kind of confused by that. Todd Bates and the defense shouldn't really be impacted by some of the transition chaos that we'll talk about in a minute. So kind of strange, not sure quite what's going on there. Keep expecting to come back on this podcast and announce 3 or 4 offers and some visits. So that's a little strange, not quite sure what's going on there. All right, let's get this story out of the way. We'll put a fork in this topic and move on. Andrew Babalola committed to Michigan. There's nothing more to really see here. Michigan was the favorite, had been the favorite for a while. I didn't know initially that Andrew has family from Michigan. I think his mom grew up there. So there was actually while OU is sort of the distance favorite, Michigan sort of had a family connection as well, which aided them in this recruiting. And I think when we get right down to it, OU was not able to overcome the 3 elite tackle issue once OU got Fasusi, and once it became clear that Ryan Foji was as highly rated as Babalola by several services. I just don't think OU's pitch to Babalola I think he just lost some weight. Maybe I'm being too optimistic here and hopium. I kind of feel like if OU had missed out on Fasusi, that they would have got Babalola, that he liked OU that much, wanted to be coached by Bill Biedenbaugh, which we'll get to that topic as well. I think Babalola would have chose OU if OU had not gotten Michael Fasusi. So Babalola to Michigan. It's Michigan's first 5-star player since Will Johnson, the cornerback, who I believe he's either a junior or senior. So it's been a while since Michigan's had a 5-star player. So just think about that. OU's on a run of 3 years in a row of having 5 stars. Bowen, PJ, and Arnold, and obviously David Stone, and now Michael Fasusi. So big pickup for Michigan. Probably happy he's not going to be in the SEC. I didn't think Stanford would end up winning out. Auburn obviously made a big push. Happy he's not going to Missouri. So Babalola to Michigan. Let's end that story. And I'm not anticipating a flurry of O-line high school offers coming out of that decision, and we'll get to some of that story in a minute. So Caleb Burns, the linebacker target we've been talking about for several weeks, actually didn't visit for the South Carolina game unofficially. I'm not exactly sure why that trip was scrubbed. At this point, I think Burns is still scheduled to visit officially for the Bama game, but it's a little curious. It's a little curious as to what's happened there. OU Insider has an update on that. I'm not going to ruin their paywall information. They have an update there that I haven't seen anywhere else. Indicates the it's the update on the Burns recruiting. So OU hasn't made any more linebacker offers to some players that they've been looking at, including a guy, I'm going to try and get his name right, Bradley Chompers, who Michigan just offered and a couple other big schools offered. He's 6'5", 220, 6'4", 6'5", 220, athletic, could be a linebacker, could be a tight end. I guess he could even be a rush linebacker or a defensive end. OU has been circling him, but has not made an offer. Some other big schools have jumped in, so I'm not quite sure what OU was waiting on, or if they weren't quite sure what position and fit he was on the roster. So no traffic there. On a positive side, Utah offensive tackle Austin Peay did visit for the South Carolina game officially. Pay's listed at 6'7", 280+ range, and in the social media traffic that he posted during his official visit, he certainly looks every bit that size. He's towering over Brent in their photo. He looks big in the gray anthracite OU jerseys that he used for his little photo session. He looks like a big kid. There's a report from 247 that Peay had a really good visit, and OU could be his final choice. The major caveat with Peay, and just a reminder from talking about him last week, Peay is part of the Mormon Church, and he's going to take his mission after high school and would not enroll until spring 2027 is what I believe his intentions are. So obviously BYU handles that situation all the time with players, and he has family connections to BYU. So I would be stunned if he did not choose BYU. But OU's recruiting him. OU seems to understand what he's talking about. And if OU can hang on to their O-line tackles in this class, then Peay is showing up 2 years later. It might work out. I've watched his film. He looks like he would be a good right tackle, big guy. But OU obviously, BYU's used to navigating this situation, and obviously in the past has had offensive linemen who were 23, 24, grown men, 25, beating on high school kids, and that's been an effective a tool for them on the offensive line, especially. So, BYU knows how to handle that process. OU, I don't believe has ever signed a player, had them go on a mission, and then have them return to Oklahoma. So, if it wasn't for that, I think this would be a great addition, because I think Peay has probably got a longer development pipeline than Foji and Fasuzi. And that would give you, 5 players in the class and give you some added depth at the tackle positions. So we'll see how that shakes out. Could an upset happen? Could he choose OU? Yes, he certainly could. But he wouldn't be on campus immediately. So it's kind of a wait and see thing. And you just kind of wonder with the turnover in college football these days, whether you can, he would be, if he chose BYU, it would be for local reasons, church reasons, and also fitting in with his mission requirement. So I just, college football is so tenuous and things are moving so quickly. Plus, BYU's having a really good year, a shockingly good year for them. Just beat Oklahoma State in a Friday night barn, last minute pass where OSU apparently just forgot to play defense and gave up a touchdown to BYU. So BYU, I think that's where he'll end up. But something he could, I'm not sure when he's making a decision, but he could choose OU. It just seems hard with all the transfer portal and all the transitions that are going on in college football right now to talk about banking a player for 2 years and then they show up, and somehow that's all still going to work. OU has offered a non-high school player for 2025. They offered JUCO offensive guard, also could play center. He has center footage as well. Jaden Wynn. He's midterm eligible with 3 years to play 2, which means he has a redshirt year available. Wynn has a bunch of Power 5 offers, including 3 or 4 SEC offers. He's got player offers from around the country. And as I said, he legitimately can play center or offensive guard, so he definitely has some flexibility there. OU's been following some JUCO offensive linemen, so you almost wonder if Bill, if he gets to make those decisions, is interested in maybe bringing in some JUCO talent versus just portal talent, depending upon who exits and what OU thinks they really need. So Wynn, as I said, is a JUCO player. Could enroll, could be on campus for spring. And it's an interesting guy. The film is good. It's not like brilliant. He's not some behemoth guy. He's big. He's powerful. He's physical. The film looks perfectly fine. The offer seems understandable from a quick perusal of this film, but it doesn't seem just like, I'm not coming in here and saying, wow, this guy's unbelievable. It's good film. I haven't seen the film that was available online was from last year, so I haven't got film of him this year. Maybe it's significantly better. I don't know. But he's got a bunch of offers, so he probably needs to start scheduling visits if he wants to sign and enroll in January. All right, so I've buried the lead enough with 2025 updates. So let's talk about the coaching change. So Joe John Finley is now the interim offensive coordinator and play caller. And Kevin Johns is now the quarterback coach. Now, a lot of folks are wondering, the tight end group is not doing very well. Why is Joe John getting a promotion? And I would say this isn't really a promotion. This is simply Brent had to make a change after the disaster on offense in the first quarter that the South Carolina game was. And Joe John is best equipped of the guys on staff to call plays. I don't think Brent wanted to muddy the waters by hiring someone who was out on the street available to call plays. It's not something where you can just pull some guy in. I know some people have been throwing around the name of Graham Harrell, who just got fired from Purdue. Not really a winning resume point. So, you have to have somebody call plays. And I think Joe John is the natural. He was the co-offensive coordinator. He's the natural option. Jeff Lebby felt like Joe John Finley was ready to call plays. So we'll see. I think the bigger piece in this is Kevin Johns getting to be the single voice in the quarterback room and be the quarterback coach. He's a veteran, experienced quarterback coach. I think OU suffered from not having a single voice quarterback coach for the players. Seth is not a quarterback coach. Neither is Joe John. or at least doesn't have the experience doing that. And I think that's been a big part of this problem and part of this this situation in terms of why the quarterbacks don't seem to be getting any better. That's my guess. So we'll see if Kevin Johns can help Jackson Arnold navigate the rest of the season and improve. We'll see if Joe John Finley can call a simple, executable game plan for this offensive line and for this offense. Not having don't have a lot of expectations that we're going to see some significant improvement. Would like to see some improvement from the young wide receivers and from from Jackson Arnold, our quarterback. If he could have as positive as possible 5 games with some growth to end this season, that's a small win from the mess that OU finds themselves in. I had somebody ask me, what would it take for Joe John Finley to win the job? They were concerned about that some way. But I think the first problem Joe John Finley has in winning the job is that he's not coached, developed, or recruited the tight end position very well. And that's his position. That's even moving forward, that would be his position. You'd assign somebody you'd bring in a quarterback coach to complement him as with him being play caller. So that's the biggest problem. I don't know how he overwrites any of those concerns over the next 5 games. He's certainly not pulling in a big name tight end between now and December, but the end of the LSU game. And it would be stunning if the tight ends all of a sudden started playing better. They haven't been playing well. So we'll see. So ignoring that factor, just what would it take for him to be so good at OC that you'd have to consider him for the job? So OU's 4-3. They're not going to be favored in any of their remaining 5 games other than Maine. So basically, we'd have to see a productive offense improving game over game, and we'd have to get at least 2 more wins on the board out of Ole Miss, Missouri, Bama, and LSU. I'm not quite sure how you pull that off, but I would say that's what I would have to say is that, OU would have to get to 7-5, 8-4 to even start that kind of conversation. And that means, the main game will give OU 5 wins. So in order to get to 7-5, you'd have to win 2 out of the remaining 4 SEC games, or to get to 8-4, 3 of them. And that does not seem that does not seem projectable or hopeful in any way, shape when you're a 21-point underdog to Ole Miss. You're probably going to be a double-digit underdog to Missouri. You're going to be a double-digit underdog to Bama in Norman. And you're probably going to be a double-digit underdog at LSU. That's what I would guess the spreads would be if they were released today. So I think Joe John Finley is coaching for his next job somewhere else. But we'll see. But that's why I think, it's not that Joe Johns deserves this. It's Brent needed to make a move for any number of reasons. The biggest one, obviously, being now that Seth is moved out, agents for big-time candidates can make their way through third-party backdoor communication. Agents for big-time offensive coordinators can now that they're not stepping over someone who already has the job, they can now start making communication. They can start passing information between agents and whatever middleman OU uses in these types of situations to get resumes, to get interest level. That can all start so that OU can strike as quickly as possible, because the LSU game, I believe, is 11:30, November 30th, part of that late Thanksgiving weekend this year. And immediately, Brent should announce, okay, we're looking for a new offensive coordinator. Joe John Finley is not going to be our long-term offensive coordinator. And we're looking for an offensive coordinator. And then I think Brent would want to let the offensive coordinator make the decision about the rest of the offensive staff. That's what I would tell them. If I was the candidate coming in, I think I'd already have a game plan of what I want to do. Because it's obvious Brent wants to empower and give autonomy to a offensive coordinator that's going to run the offense. So Brent can focus on keeping the defense at an elite level, coordinating with Zach Alley, and he could focus on game management. He doesn't want to be meddling in the offense, in the offensive part of the team, and that makes sense. That can work as long as he's willing to put the time in and hire elite, seasoned veteran offensive coordinators. So I got three simple. If you subscribe to my Patreon, and if you don't, please subscribe to it. I put up kind of a scorecard of how to rank candidates, giving points to different characteristics and values, and judging some folks. I'll just give you three things that I think are key right now. You've got to be a quarterback coach. I think OU has that biggest failing in this whole Littrell thing was not having a dedicated quarterback coach on staff. I think that's the biggest problem. Can't do that. Then is the person that's got to be a play calling veteran. This is not OU. Where OU is currently is not a position where someone can learn on the job. They've got to have at least 3 years of play calling, ideally some play calling experience at the Power 4 or what was the Power 5 level, or maybe the NFL level. And then I think you've also got to have some either prior experience or demonstrate to Brent the ability to put together an offensive staff. OU probably is going to make some changes there. The rest of the season will determine maybe, someone like Emmett Jones, I think, is probably got the best excuse for why things have been in such a bad shape. Bill is obviously a lightning, is a hot topic. Not going to go. I could go an hour on that. Not going to do that. But regardless, if you are taking over the OU job and you want to basically clean house on the offensive side of the ball, I think Brent would be like, okay, that's fine. But you got to have a plan for that. You got to have names. You've got to have connections. You've got to have people that you want to slot in, and you can't take a lot of time either. So 3 names being thrown around by multiple websites that I've heard from some folks that I would seem to make various levels of sense in terms of what OU want. 2 of them probably are hard pulls from their current job. One is an interesting pull. So we'll just go from there. So one is Joe Craddock, the offensive coordinator at Tulane. He was an offensive coordinator in the SEC previously. He's 39. He's got quite a bit of experience. The only downside is his last offensive coordinator job in the SEC was for the Chad Morris disaster experience in Fayetteville. So those offensive teams were terrible. They went 2-10, and the offenses were just not good. Then we have Will Stein, the offensive coordinator at Oregon. He's got some connections to the Texas area. Would he be willing to make what is in essence a lateral move? He makes $1.4 million. I'm anticipating OU needs to have the idea in their mind that if they want to compete for the best guys in college football, they need to have a war chest of $2 to $2.5 million to offer at offensive coordinator. Could that land you Will Stein? I have no idea. Could it land you the next guy on the name? Now, really, OU screwed this up by not hiring this guy last year. Brent did the promote from inside versus get best guy from outside approach. Dabo and Bob have used that to success sometimes and failure other times. So the guy I think is the best overall fit, but the hardest guy to get is Andy Kotelnicki at Penn State. He's turned the Penn State offense into actual offense. He's a really good coach, great experience at Kansas, tormenting Brent for 2 years. Just a really good offensive coordinator. Drew Allar, who was not doing really anything last year, is thriving under his development and his play calling. So I would like to see OU make Andy Kotelnicki and Will Stein tell you no and start from there. There's some wild cards out there that are interesting, but those are three names that I think make sense based upon what OU needs. I know everyone's hot on the Indiana guys, but the problem there is the quarterback coach, Timo Sunseri, hasn't called plays, and the play caller, Mike Shanahan, not related to the NFL Shanahans, he's not a quarterback coach. He's a wide receiver coach. And I don't see any way that you could hire both of them from Indiana and bring them on, because if Shanahan leaves, I would imagine that Cignetti will promote Sunseri to offensive coordinator, play caller. So I just don't see how the Indiana situation will work. All right, so what's the initial fallout from Seth Littrell being let go? At this point, there are no decommitments. It's still early, but Seth really wasn't part of recruiting this class, really, to a certain degree. I mean, he came on board. He came on board in February. He came on board after Lebby had left. Lebby had already established Kevin Sperry as the quarterback recruit. And a lot of the wide receivers were already on board. Obviously, the offensive linemen were added this year, but that's primarily Bill. So the only name really I think that's in doubt would be 2026 QB Jaden O'Neal. And I would imagine Jaden is probably going to give OU a chance to hire a new guy and then meet with the new guy and then make a decision as to whether he's going to stick with his OU verbal or, open his recruiting back up. I think Jaden likes OU, likes the OU atmosphere, likes being, and, I know OU's still a big quarterback name. Dylan Gabriel was just here last year, Caleb Williams. I mean, the lineage of OU quarterbacks, going back to Baker Mayfield and going back to Sam Bradford and Jason White and Josh Heupel, is well established. So being the one guy for OU still has some cachet and some prestige in it. So I think Jaden wants to stick with OU and go from there. 2026 quarterbacks are starting to, it's musical chairs out there in terms of big programs. Looks like Oregon or Bama maybe pulled Jared Curtis from Georgia. So he's back on the market. He's from Tennessee. Excellent quarterback, might be the best quarterback in the class. That depends upon who you talk to. So there is some movement around there, but a lot of programs have gotten their 2026 kid. Big time programs have got their 2026 kid and have sort of shut down recruiting. A&M does, Texas does, Michigan does, Clemson does. I believe USC is close to getting their guy. Obviously, Bama and UGA are going to be fighting over Curtis along with Oregon. I think Oregon is maybe looking around a little bit at their quarterback situation beyond Dante Moore. So if O'Neal hits the market, there'll be lots of folks after him. But I think Ohio State has their guy as well. So I think, we'll just see. But I think O'Neill will give OU will give OU at least. I mean, he's not enrolling. He's a year. He's going to enroll early January 2026. So lots of things to play out for Jaden O'Neill, and I think he'll let OU get a big name in and see where they are. The more significant coaching upheaval is beyond Littrell. Obviously, if Joe John Finley isn't retained, which I'm anticipating he won't be at this point. There's no other data we have. There's no tight ends in 2025, really, that you would lose. Trinae Washington, the Carl Albert H-back, big flex tight end guy, is probably sticking with OU, I would guess. And 2026, tight end commitment rider mix is an OU legacy. So at least I think he'd at least give OU a chance. He'll at least stay with OU until the situation's sorted out and then meet with the new staff and figure out where things are. Obviously, Joe John missed on the three big local talents, Deson Brom, Lincoln Cure, and Nate Roberts. If he'd gotten one of those guys, I think obviously the recruiting picture would be very different. So, that's where we stand. Obviously, if there is coaching fallout at offensive line or wide receiver, that could have significant changes in the recruiting class down the road. But let's cross that bridge when we get to it. The two bigger issues right now, and they extend beyond Littrell, really. Number one is, with all this uncertainty, OU's ability to add and compete for additional high school recruits in 2025 at O-line and tight end for the next 6 weeks before early signing day is pretty reduced, or crippled might be too strong a word, but it's definitely taken a major hit. It's going to be hard. I mean, Joe John Finley, what's he going to do? Offer two tight end, another high school tight end, knowing that he's, with everybody negatively recruiting the fact they're going to say he's not going to be there. Same thing for Bill. It's going to be hard for O-line, for him to battle for some O-line guys at this point if he wants to make some offers. This is why we made offers earlier. But as I went on my rant last week, and I won't do that again. But, the other issue is it's less specific. It's just me reviewing the recruiting industry and recruiting all the notes around. So the other big issue here is that all this offensive lack of cohesion, meltdown, abomination, to use Brent's word, and the back-to-back bad losses, they've put OU's recruiting momentum for 2026, for the most part, into a stall. OU had really good 26 recruiting momentum in the summer, had good visits in September, and then things they're now stalled. And there's lots of players in 2026, especially D-line, which is kind of weird because it doesn't really seem to be impacted by this. Just not seeing OU getting in on names at linebacker and D-line that much. Wide receiver seems fine. Running back's fine for now. But it's it's a general feeling I have that there's not a lot of buzz or play from big name recruits right now with OU. That's not a big surprise. Texas obviously had a host of guys over the weekend for the Georgia game. Alabama has had big weekends. Georgia's had big weekends. So it's just, OU's big weekend was Tennessee, and it didn't work. So let's just move to some other specific recruiting updates and end with that. So just two 2026 updates. So to try and give you guys some good news here, OU got an unofficial visit from 2026 elite defensive tackle Tank Carrington from Bishop Gorman and Vegas. Carrington's junior film has started to post. It's excellent. He's the penetrating, attacking 3-tech that you want. He looks like he has a frame where he could easily carry. He looks like he's every bit 6'3", 270 right now, but has a lean, powerful frame where I think he could easily be 290 while keeping his speed and his quickness. In a very similar way to Trenton Wilson. And obviously him coming on his own dime is a great sign. I think there's some chatter he might come back for another game. But anyway, OU firmly placing themselves for Tank Carrington, who's a top 50 player in the nation, I would say probably, is a great move. OU's progress with Carrington and Deuce Geralds, who's also kind of a 3-tech. He's been to a couple of games. That's very, very positive. Then I'm just talking about OU targets. OU 2026 wide receiver target, Aljor Miles, had a just ridiculous day over the weekend. I'm presuming these are career highs for him. He had 9 receptions for 238 yards of 4 touchdowns. And Miles is a physical freak. So his on-the-field excellence this year, he's been racking up stats, should see him vault up the wide receiver rankings, which is hard because wide receiver is just loaded every year. But I think Miles is on his way to just vaulting up those rankings with this kind of season he's posting. I mean, he's 6'3", 200 pounds and just, built out of, just looks like a Greek god. So with him now putting all of that physical potential into production, actual production, I think he should skyrocket up the rankings. Then OU made another new offer. It was an in-state offer for 2027. This is a 2027 update to Caden Penny from Bixby. And Caden's listed at 6'5", 280. I just watched his sophomore film. That sounds about right. This is probably an offensive tackle offer, but his early sophomore tape does have some really good plays at defensive tackle as well. He's very mobile, really good athlete. His offensive tackle film for a high school sophomore is very, very good. He's got a long wingspan. As I mentioned, he's athletic, moves very well in space. He's physical, doesn't mind hitting a kid, doesn't mind, blocking a kid, pancaking a kid. So this is a good offer. I imagine he'll get a lot of regional offers as well. But overall, having Caden Penny as maybe an offensive lineman, and then we've talked about Joseph Graves from Booker T. Washington being a defensive tackle option. If the state of Oklahoma can give you, at least one offensive lineman and one big defensive lineman every year, that's a huge win for OU. So Penny, I think Penny has a really high ceiling to be a very highly rated player. And he was also at the South Carolina game, for better or worse. So thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and don't forget to leave a rating. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe to the podcast. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel and give us a thumbs up. And again, please visit patreon.com/Sooners360817 to subscribe for more recruiting content on Patreon. That Patreon channel directly supports this podcast and this YouTube channel. It helps keeps these podcasts and videos free, and allows me to provide you this content on a weekly basis, which I hope you guys will all appreciate. Once again, that's this week. We'll be back with an update. OU's on the road at Ole Miss, so they won't be hosting any visitors. We'll be back early next week with another recruiting update. Anything we hear about the coaching search, unless there's some decommit or commitment action that forces an update later this week. Thanks, everyone.